And today we have once again our weekday broadcast on the unpublished writings of Paramhansa Yogananda. I've been choosing some of his poems which were once published, but it's unclear to me in this large collection of poems which ones might remain in print somewhere. But today I've chosen one that was published in November 1925, so he'd only been in America about 5 years or so, and it's titled simply Cosmic Consciousness. Now the poem is a bit long, so I've taken the liberty to edit out sections of it, but it'll still be a little bit long. So let's see what he has to say about cosmic consciousness. I sat with eyes closed, watching the inky darkness that enveloped me. There was naught within me but darkness, but I seemed to seek something unknown, yet familiar. I opened my eyes, and the world of splendor, richly decorated with the measureless sheet of twinkling moonbeams, some blind stars, teeming with mysteries unspoken, myriads of flowers, green velvet grass, chains of shining mountain peaks, light-jeweled waves of the heaving seas, mighty power of cities, these mocked at me and called me dreamer. Even as I thought this, I felt the thrilling call of some mysterious charm within me. I closed again the doors of my eyes, and I was confronted with the same darkness. I watched, though, with steady vision, looking and seeking in all directions, sometimes bewildered. I felt I caught glimpses of opaque thought, which became half visible in that deep mystic chamber. I steadily watched in the dim but growing light of my concentration. The gloom became softer and revealed its hidden glory. I found I could see there without my eyes, see each glimmering thought like dream lightning. I found I could hear there without my ears the muffling, chafing roars of loud, powerful thoughts, softer, sweet suggestions of conscience, and the quiet voice of reason. I heard distinctly all they said, as I had never heard them before. Thus, for the first time, I felt the presence of these living, inner, visible blood relations, my own family. These, my own, long had lived so near in this dark chamber, planning, organizing, molding my destiny, yet unassuming, unnoticed, unseen, unheeded. What charm you cast around, what stupendous work you do, invisible friends! Are you afraid to plainly appear to the crude, scorching gaze of human minds? Do you fear to be hurt by the twilight of pale, unthinking mentalities, or choked by the gross vibrations of noisy matter? Yet how stealthily you go out of the dark chamber to build huge skyscrapers, mighty bridges, all material achievements, and then slip away unknown, unthanked, unhonored, unsought. The coursing train in the nightly gloom, the whirling airplane, the floating steel village with small cabins, the triumphs of art, the Parthenon, Taj Mahal, all man-made miracles, all remind me of you only and your powers, O mighty thoughts. Whose is the cosmic hand that works so wisely, powerfully everywhere? I wonder whose all-pervading voice commands the sun, moon, and stars and planets, earth, nature, seasons, the ebbing and flowing seas, man, life, death, and receives their obedience. Is there an infinite chamber of mystery in which one limitless, luminous mind hides and secretly reaches forth to decorate the universe with endless charms? Down through the windows of memory I looked. I recalled the early hour of my childhood where the sun of my consciousness first began to gradually appear. As it slowly rose out of the darkness of the unconscious mind and dimly lighted only one part of my little mental horizon. That lay encompassing my mother, playthings, and a few multicolored candies. Later, as my consciousness grew brighter, I found a greater part of my mental horizon became illumined. I saw in it many other things, my friends, relations, neighbors, country. These were revealed and included. Now, as I look within on the mental sky, the sun of my consciousness seems to be shining brighter than ever in its supreme power. I would discover the sun of cosmic consciousness. I find it quite interesting, and hardly the first person to comment on it, but find it quite interesting how humanity in these many past centuries has worked so mightily to discover the secrets of nature around us, but only in the latter part of the 19th century began to get more serious about the inner chamber of the workings of our mind. Curious to me that in the Western consciousness, where many great things have been done, great in the sense of, Roman buildings and Greek art and plays and so many things, the cathedrals and so forth, the mighty governments and empires, but very little in the West has focused on those invisible friends, as he calls them, who make all of this possible. The little riddle, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there, does it make a noise? What that is really asking us is to look at the consciousness that is necessary to perceive all of these things, to think all of these thoughts. It's really a stupendous empire, vast and more mighty than anything that we see visibly with our eyes or do materially with our hands. None of this would exist without the consciousness to create it or even simply to perceive it. And this task, this investigation, has been given to the eastern hemisphere of this planet during the many centuries of relative darkness of consciousness, and is now coming out into the open to match the great powers of the West over material nature, to the point of even destroying it potentially. And so these thoughts are not new thoughts, but I have had a fascination over the years with the extent to which God participates in creation. Well, not creation, we know he created the whole darn thing, but in human history. And, there are those who might perchance say, yes, it seems to be some mighty force has created all this, but this mighty force doesn't seem to be interested in me or what goes on here, given all the suffering and evil. So there's that kind of philosophy. God is distant and uninvolved, etc. You can't blame them, really, given the mess we've made of things. But in any case, so there's that philosophy. And then, of course, the other far more predominant philosophy in religion and so forth is that God is very personal. And we can pray to God and have all sorts of intimate relations, as it were. Yogananda would say sometimes you have to individually make love to God. And so we find, and down through history and religion, we have God as the Father, somewhat distant. We have God as the Mother, very close and yet sometimes powerful and disciplining. And we even have God as the baby child, as in the baby Jesus or baby Krishna and so forth. There was even one saint in Christianity, Saint Joseph of Cupertino, who worshipped not the baby, the infant Jesus, but the infant mother of Jesus. And so, and then in certain traditions, the worship of God, or the metaphor for God's presence, is that of the lover or the divine friend. And so, and of course, we make fun of this. At least our civilization seems to make light of those civilizations and peoples who have worshipped the powers of nature as gods and goddesses, and so on. So overwhelmingly, the relationship to the Creator has been one of a personal nature. In the Adam and Eve story, I've puzzled over this, as have many, many people, so I'm not claiming anything here, believe me. But, with Yogananda's teaching of his guru's revelation of the or course correction to the ancient and humanly widespread teaching of the different ages of consciousness through which we go. He talks about how the Adam and Eve story is a fall from grace, right? Well, in the correction to the Yuga cycle, all of what we know as human history on this planet is essentially takes place during a fall, a descent of human consciousness into ever-increasing ignorance until it reached its nadir, its lowest point, sometime around the fall of the Roman Empire, I think in the 4th or 5th century. And yet we think of our history as being somewhat glorious, but in fact, I cannot help but wonder, when they try to date the Adam and Eve story through the Old Testament with all the generations that are listed and so on. I think it's around, 4,000 BC or somewhere in that neighborhood. And it occurred to me that the fall from the Garden of Eden certainly coincides all too neatly and nicely with the fall from the highest ages of consciousness into the increasing descent. Adam and Eve, and then their sons, and Cain kills Abel, and then a little bit later on we have the Tower of Babel, or Babel, whatever it is, and then we have the flood. It's like, geez, things are pretty rotten. And human consciousness is not really shown to be all that wonderful, is it, in the history of the Old Testament? And so, the participation of God in human history is attested I told in a talk I gave at Spiritual Renewal Week last year, the charming, although curious story of Sodom and Gomorrah before that those towns were destroyed. God appears as as a man in a human form, walking with another man in human form, who I think was an angel, and meets with Jacob and Sarah. And Sarah's hiding out in the tent and listening to what they have to say, and it's just this funny little story, and very personal, and I forget now exactly the story, but the point is that participation of God in human history. And so we have this belief by peoples in these admittedly darkening yugas or cycles of time that, like Jesus, before Abraham was, I am. I and my Father are one. And so it's only natural that Christians, not having any real exposure to anything else, and the Jews not believing in anything like unto the appearance of God in human form, or a Messiah in that sense, rather than their only experience was a Messiah like Moses, who saved them from political bondage, essentially, and gave them new laws, okay, but, their prophets were mainly messengers. So they weren't prepared, really, for the Son of God to appear within them. And similarly in the other great tradition of the East, which became Hinduism over time, the belief that Rama and Krishna and Buddha and others were incarnations of the Godhead. Okay, this is what we've sort of inherited, and Yogananda, by contrast, gives us the teaching that all these great souls have evolved like you and I, and as many as will receive a self-realized avatar will become the sons of God, just like them. So the teaching for this age, in which we are awakening to our own powers, is that Tatvamasi, thou art that. And so the thought that God came into human form like in a direct way is not what we're teaching. I don't know that precludes it being true, however. Yogananda had a mission, and like Moses and others, he could only speak to those with ears to hear, and it would do us no good to think of these divine puppets coming down and parading around and so on and so forth. What point is that? We want to know what we can do. And so I've come to the conclusion that other teaching isn't necessarily 100% wrong. It just isn't relevant. There are many things that Yogananda would not comment on. The Adam and Eve story, he just, pretty much the Bible, he took more or less at face value. He didn't argue with translations. He didn't argue with people tampered with the Bible particularly. He simply took it as it was and tried to show the deeper meaning. Okay, and it was important. I mean, in the Bible itself, the connection of Jesus to John the Baptist and the two of them to Elias and Elisha is so plainly evident with eyes to see. And when you speak in terms of reincarnation, it makes it really fit his message perfectly. He said before, I killed Yogananda long ago. So, that's the teaching we need to hear. But I think it's also true that God participates in human history. Okay, through the angels, people tell remarkable stories of miracles and the appearance of other beings and so forth. So yes, God does work through instruments. So I think as we are exploring this universe and finding how entirely, almost magical, string theory, dark energy, dark matter, those are just terms for what we can't identify. They give them terms and we think, oh yeah, all right, yeah, it's dark energy, you bet, I love it. But we don't know what it is. And so as we explore this wonderful universe, I think it's important to keep open to so many things that we're not ready to hear. And it's so easy to get dogmatic about such things. So, I just love this poem because it's like our thoughts are our invisible friends. Our consciousness out of which the thoughts come is an invisible force. We can't taste it, touch it. It's dark and yet it produces light. It's dark in the sense that it has no attributes, but it's always there. This is really an amazing revelation. I was talking to somebody yesterday, a friend who said that one of her friends, she tried to have sit and meditate, but she sat down on the chair and immediately jumped up, could not handle a moment of quietness, a moment of self-reflection. Well, I think that's true for most of the billions of people on this planet. They just run away scared to death of the dark. Okay, so for those of us who do attempt to close our eyes and enter the dark realm, use our practices to become still, and then open our hearts to that living, loving presence out of which all things come, that itself is a miracle, that we would seek to explore the unknown recesses of our own consciousness, which is cosmic. All right, we're having fun, aren't we? Okay.